Thank you, Neil. Now, normally you can't shut me up, but I do have a bit of a cold today, so you might get a bit of a briefer presentation than normal, and you also might get a coughing fit, so we'll see how we go. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I was lucky enough to be the recipient of the Water Professional of the Year award. I almost said Young Water Professional of the Year award, but no, unfortunately not so much, not maybe 20 years ago. And at AWA dinner in Melbourne last week, Lindsay was asking me what that meant for me and what that did, what that I guess honour had bestowed upon me, and it actually gave me a really amazing opportunity to reflect on my life in the water industry. I've been in the water industry for over 20 years. I usually take off 5, but it's been quite some time. And I started very young when I was in the call centre, and I started on a 2 till 7 p.m. shift. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, and there was a job going at the water company that was 5 minutes from my house, and it meant I could kind of go out on a Saturday night and still be able to sleep in. And so it felt like it was the right decision at that point in my life. And then something happened in that, and I started to be really engaged in what we did, and I started to really connect to what it meant to work for an essential service. You know, what it meant to be there for your community and to provide something that is truly essential to life. As I am a female, and I started in my career, I had my son quite early on. And the thing that I loved about, I worked for Yarra Valley Water, and the thing that I loved about working there was no point in my life where I had to make a choice about whether I wanted to be a good parent or be a good career professional. I was given the opportunity to do both. I came back to work when my son was quite young, and he was at the childcare centre, which happened to be next door to work, and there was a back gate. So I had a piece of work I had to do, and I explained to work that I was a feeding mother, so I had to go across and feed my son every 3 hours. And that was fine. It basically was set up that I had a particular amount of work I had to do in a particular amount of time, and if I needed to go and do things in between that, as long as I got the work done. I mean, this was 20 years ago, and we talk about diversity now, but 20 years ago my workplace enabled me to come back to the workforce. I wasn't judged, I wasn't treated differently, and in fact I was given a key to the back gate, to the reserve, which cut through to the childcare centre, so it only took me 10 minutes to run across there. I think I'm very passionate about all things diversity and inclusion, and I think many years later I had my second son. He's also 20, not my birth son, my foster son, and again my work community and my family community and the environment in which my son grew up in all came together to support him through some life issues that had occurred for my foster son. And again, it's that community focus I feel like we have in this industry that's pretty special. So part of my role as the water professional is around what we're doing with younger professionals that are coming through. And I'm exceptionally passionate about our young water professionals. I'm so driven to continue to get these smart, bright, amazing people to come into our industry. And we talk a lot about recruitment and how do we attract people to this industry that we're in. And these days, the younger generation, they're a bit more discerning than maybe I was with my, wanting to go to the pub on a Friday night type scenario. They're wanting to work for an organisation that's sustainable. They're wanting to work for an organisation that has an environmental focus and that is really socially conscious. They're very tough on who they're going to pick. And that's why I think the water industry is such a perfect place for our amazing young professionals coming through. I'm just going to have some water. Because in fact, that's what the water industry is. We have such a connection to community, and as I said, we are the most essential of essential services. Water and sanitation services are all about the health and wellbeing of our community for this generation and for future generations, and that's a pretty big responsibility. I was lucky enough in my career at Yarrow to also work with WaterAid for the past 11 years, and I got to go over to Timor-Leste and see what life's like in villages that didn't have access to safe water and sanitation, and then to see communities that had had the WASH program come through and did. And I think that was such a stark moment for me in really truly understanding the value of water and sewer services and safe sanitation in community. You know, what was striking, and I must admit I probably cried most days, but what was striking to me was that it wasn't just about the fact that it was creating healthier communities and that the kids were having happier lives and that there was a safe access to drinking water. It was about the fact that women in those towns, in those villages, were now able to run businesses. They were now able to spend so much time in community doing things. The female students were able to go to school because they weren't spending their time going and searching for water. It changed the entire social construct of those villages. You know, domestic violence in those villages went down, respect for women went up, and that was all driven by the work that was done in the water and sanitation space. So we have a pretty big responsibility in the work that we do. We also know that vulnerability is a part of that. So through WaterAid, you see it at its starkest point. But here in Australia, we have almost 50% of people experiencing some sort of vulnerability or some sort of risk to that vulnerability. You know, everything's going okay and you might have your 2 kids in school and you might have your house, and then something changes. Now, it could be a job loss. It could be a health issue. There could be someone experiencing family violence. But all of these things make all of us really vulnerable. You know, if you think about those times in your life where you are vulnerable and you feel a bit out of control, you know, you don't have control of your circumstances, and it's a pretty scary place to be. So when you're talking about essential services like water, making sure that people can always feel safe and connected to that service is absolutely critical. I'm really inspired by this industry. The work that we do around community and the work that we do around connecting to that community. We do amazing works in the pumps and pipe space. We do some fantastic work in technology, but we are also leaders in how we work with customers who are vulnerable. The work that the Victorian water industry did around family violence was a first for this country, but also it was looked at across the world. It's where an industry got together and there was a Royal Commission, for those of you who aren't Victorian, into family violence after Rosie Batty's son was killed in a family violence incident. And what that Royal Commission unearthed was that, in fact, utilities are critical in making a change here. If we're going to make systemic change in the issues around things like family violence, now, you don't start at a water company thinking that this is the work you're going to do. Here's a hot tip. But the reality is we have a part to play. We know that people are using things like water bills and electricity bills and telco bills and that debt as a weapon against people experiencing family violence. We know that it enables them to trap people experiencing family violence in their circumstances and households. And we also know that a partner will know the key elements of someone's privacy details to be able to access their information and get their forwarding addresses. Now, the Royal Commission unearthed that in a number of utilities, that those forwarding details were passed on to the perpetrator, and in those instances, the victims end up hospitalised because of it. We know that homelessness is, for women in this country, women and children, the highest cause of homelessness for women and children in this country is family violence. Now, it's a big issue, but every single one of us has a part to play, and the water industry decided that they wanted to be a part of that. So they collaborated together to say, what do we need to do? How do we need to address this? And other industries, banking and telecommunications and energy, were watching what we were doing because it's scary, this stuff. It's not a safe space to be in. We don't know what we're doing. And so all of these industries were watching what we did, and we stood, as we do in the water industry, we stood together. And we said, okay, we are not the experts in this space, but we are going to collaborate and work together to make sure that we are doing everything in our power so that we are actually part of the solution and not the problem. And that's been now recognised both nationally and internationally that an industry has done this. Now, speaking of which, this industry, you look at the work we've done in the SDGs, the first industry to collectively come together to start addressing some of those problems. And that's the industry that we're a part of. That's pretty amazing. The other thing that we've been really focused on is around the vulnerable customer space. So across water, all of our organisations have, hardship policies and programs to support those experiencing difficulties paying their bills. And that's because we don't want anyone in our community not to have access to this essential service. We know that life circumstances come up. All of us have experienced something in our life, even if it's ill health or, your car breaking down. And these things do make it harder for us in life. So at Yarra Valley Water, we started the WaterCare program. So we've been running this program for almost 20 years, probably about 18 years, I think. And it started around having conversations with customers. So we got a panel of customers to come in and, we thought we were pretty good. We were doing all right. We were, helping people out and giving them payment arrangements over, we can give you an extension for 2 weeks for that $500 bill. And what we found when we started speaking to some community representatives is, turns out, not so good with how we were behaving in community. And it wasn't because our intent wasn't there. We just didn't get it, basically. So a local community organisation, Uniting Kildonan, brought in 3 customers, and they sat those 3 customers in front of our management team and they told us their stories. So when you're sitting in a room and you've got real customers in front of you and they're in tears and they're telling you that when they rang up and said that they had their child in hospital and they had medical expenses and they had a $200 bill and they said, I can't pay that yet, I'm going to need a couple of weeks to think about that, I just don't have the money. And we said, well, okay, we can give you a week, but we're going to need that $200. And then they said to us, well, I could pay you $50 now, and then I could pay you $20, and then I could pay you $25, and we're going to need the $200. So as a result, that parent went home and didn't provide food for themselves. They had to go home and think about how they were going to get the money together to pay for their medical supplies for their child because they didn't want their water disconnected. Now, there was a number of those stories that occurred and we were all horrified because you're following a process. Our staff were following a process. The process says that these are the payment terms and there wasn't flexibility in that and we weren't thinking about the human on the other end of that phone. And that was a catalytic moment for us. I think when you're in service to the community and your community stand in front of you and say, this is how you made me feel. These are the decisions I had to make because of your decisions. That's a pretty stark reminder that we are an essential service. So we had a whole range of customers come through and tell us what we could do better, what would work for you. And customers said, if you actually had have let me pay $20, I would have been able to keep that up. I could have done $20 a fortnight, but you wouldn't let me. So then in the end, we got nothing. So we ended up spending all this money chasing debt for something that they didn't have. Whereas if we had have just accepted the $20 each fortnight, we would have made that money back. So we started our Arrange and Save program, which is where customers will nominate what they can afford to pay. And the entire methodology of the work that we do and the work so many water businesses do now is that instead of making people jump through hoops and signing a million forms and telling us their life story and giving us their firstborn child, we just choose to believe them when they say they're in difficulty. Now, I've been doing this for 20 years and here's the thing. When someone says they're in trouble, it's because they're in trouble. So when we first started, people were saying, people are going to game the system and, you're going to get all these people coming in, saying that they're in hardship when they're not. I'm like, yes, because people love to stand up and say, I can't afford to pay my bill. People love to come and beg for support. That's what we all love to do. We all love that feeling. It just doesn't happen. So we shifted our focus and the water industry has embraced this style of working with their community. And we've been real leaders in this space and other industries have looked at what we've done. We've also proven that not only is it the right thing to do for our community, but it's actually fiscally responsible. There's a much better business case in being a good human and listening to people and accepting what they can afford to pay and working with someone instead of telling them what to do. That actually makes good business sense. Now, other industries are slowly coming on board this journey for us. And one of the other things that we started in the water industry was the other organisation that I'm the CEO of, which is the Thriving Communities Partnership. Now, that partnership started with a conversation, and that conversation was originally just with our water friends. So Pat McCafferty, my managing director, teases me about this a bit. I said, we want to have a bit of a chat around how we could be more aligned in the work we're doing in vulnerability. So how can we have kind of similar processes? If you live in this suburb or this suburb, you shouldn't have a different experience if you're in financial difficulty. So I'm going to invite a few friends over for a coffee and, get some Arnott's biscuits out and have a bit of a chat. And then we work in this hardship space and we work with our colleagues in banking and other industries and we all go to conferences together. And they heard we were going to have this cup of tea and chat. And they were saying, we'd love to come along because we're having the same problems. And we started to go to these conferences. And every year, for those of you who have ever heard me speak before, this is the type of stuff that occurred. We would have these chats about what we're going to do. You're seeing family violence. We're seeing, you're seeing people with mental health. And how's that? How are you managing that? And, okay, let's do something together about that. And then we'd, hug it out and go off. And then a year later, we'd bump back into each other and have the exact same conversation. So they said, you guys are going to have a chat. We'll come along. And then I had to, so I was like, okay, my energy friends are going to come. I might need to get a bigger packet of biscuits. And then our friends in banking overheard. And then our friends in telecommunications overheard. And all of a sudden it went from, 10 people and a cup of tea to, sorry, Pat, I've got to hire a hall. And I had to hire a place in the city to house 130 people from across Australia. And this was the start of a really important conversation, and it was community sector, government and corporate coming together to say there are systemic issues in our community at the moment. We are suffering issues like job losses and health, and mental health is rife in this community. But we also have Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities who are in every aspect suffering way more vulnerability in their life circumstances. New migrants coming to this country and people who don't speak English are having much more difficulty in accessing the services they need. Issues like family violence are creating complete blockers to the way that we run our country. And all of these things are hurting our community, they're hurting our people, and they're hurting our companies. So this was the start of that conversation. What do we do? How do we change this? How do we shift this? Because what we know is you certainly cannot do that by yourself. No matter how passionate and how committed you are, you do not create systemic change in a silo. So we decided that we needed to get together and come up with a way of creating alignment for people experiencing difficulty. And what we often talk about is that someone experiencing family violence is already in a safety crisis, and there's often a debt crisis associated to that. So they have to ring their utility company or their bank to say that this is going on. And sometimes they're asked, do you have an intervention order? Now, for any of you who have not worked in the family violence system, and I have for many years, there's nothing in the world you would rather do less than go for an intervention order. It's horrific for the women that have to go through it, and they are at the most unsafe point when they actually go through that process of trying to leave. So we came together and said, how do we make it simpler? How do we make it so people don't have to tell their stories 50 times? Someone dealing with mental health or someone dealing with physical illness or someone who's lost their job, nobody wants to continually have to tell that story because it's embarrassing. And statistics tell us that one of the biggest reasons why people don't access the support they need is because they are embarrassed about the circumstances they're in. And the other half of that don't even know that they could get access to support services. So we decided we needed an aligned approach. So we needed to align on policies, programs and systems so that someone experiencing any form of crisis could follow that same path regardless of the service industry they were dealing with. And that conversation was, we worked people very hard. We did a lot of work before that forum and we worked them pretty hard on the day. And an outcome of that was a collective vision of what we wanted to achieve. And that vision ended up turning into the Thriving Communities Partnership. We now have 150 organisations across Australia participating in this, across government, corporate and community. Tim Costello is our chief advocate and essentially our moral compass. I don't know if you all know Tim, but he's one of those people who has such a strong moral compass and such a great understanding of what's going on in our community. And we are collectively working on issues together. We've got a national roundtable on family violence happening in the next 6 weeks. And that's around women who have experienced family violence, and it is a gendered issue. It is not only women who experience family violence, and all of the processes we set up are designed for anyone going through that experience. This particular roundtable is around women experiencing family violence, and research was done with these women over the past 20 years to say, at which point in your lifespan could it have been different? So it looks back over their lifespan, whether it be 1 or 20 years, and it looks at where the system failed them and what that failure meant. And it's this reflection of, if I knew then what I knew now, what could have been different in my life? And what we as service and industry providers are going to be saying is, if we knew then what you know now, how could we have designed our policies better? How could we have better practices to support you? And that's across government, corporate and community. And in everything we do, we have people with lived experience at the table. because the most important thing is about having the voice of the person in your conversation. And that's the other thing that this industry is fantastic at doing. We genuinely listen to our community. We genuinely care about the work that we do. And we do some pretty inspirational work. Lindsay from the Victoria branch gives me a lot of grief because at the AWA awards dinner in Brisbane, I said Google and Apple have got nothing on us. And it is true. We are such an innovative industry. And I think sometimes when we're thinking about innovation, we're thinking about technology. But in actual fact, it's innovation of thinking that makes us different. It is our genuine drive and commitment to the community that we serve that makes us different. We care about the environment and we genuinely care about the community that we serve, and we understand that responsibility and we take it very seriously. So the water industry in this country has driven major initiatives across environmental and social capital, and we should be exceptionally proud of that. I've been in this industry for over 20 years, and the reason why I find it really difficult to leave is why would I? With everything that we do, with the innovation that we show, with the drive and the passion that we have and the people that we have in this industry, it's a pretty hard space to walk away from. And I think we have to be exceptionally proud of who we are and what we do, because other industries across this country and other countries are watching what we are doing and modelling that. And we're just water companies. So we should be exceptionally happy about the work that we're doing, and I certainly know I am. And I am very proud to be part of this industry, and I was exceptionally proud to be the Water Professional of the Year in an industry that I love and value as much as this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Ciara. That's really interesting. I like the story about being given the keys to the back gate. We've got an opportunity for questions for Ciara. So there'll be a roving mic going around. Connell's got the mic, so if you're interested in asking a question, then please put up your hand. I'll start off the questions, Ciara, and I guess I'm interested. You spoke about the WaterCare initiative at Yarra Valley Water. Yarra Valley is a very progressive organisation. What's the next key focus for the WaterCare initiative for Yarra Valley?
I think for what we're looking at now is how do we take some of those barriers where we've been doing a lot of work in the hardship space for a really long time, and we hate using the word hardship and we wouldn't say it publicly, but we've been doing a lot of work in that kind of pointy end of the stick. What we need to do now is start looking at those people who are in that sort of managing capacity, but who are at risk of falling down that slippery slope if something changes. So it's about how do we access the people that are hard to access. Horrifically, even after my speech, people do not think that the water company necessarily is their most trusted person in their life, which I find personally insulting. So, they're not necessarily going to come to their water company in the first point of call. So what they will do is maybe they're going to talk to their maternal health centre about the fact that they can't afford to pay their bills. Maybe they're going to be at the library looking for information. Maybe they're going to be talking to their community worker or their, financial counsellor about that. So what we're doing now in that WaterCare program is really about getting to trusted sources and talking to them about the work they do so that they can actually then communicate that with the people who maybe would be a bit hesitant to contact us in the first instance.
Great, thank you. Any questions for Ciara?
Ciara, a couple of questions. Firstly, did you find any friends at Centrelink or the ATO?
I did at the ATO. I might have used a fake name when I was talking to them, though. Interestingly, we are working with the ATO, and if this is being recorded, we value them and trust them greatly, and it's Francesca is my name. And they're starting to do some great work in the hardship space as well, so they are actually doing stuff in that space. We've also been, through Thriving Communities, been contacted by Department of Human Services, Health and Human Services, and Department of Housing around the way that they're managing collections. Because we have organisations like Yarra, but also NAB, who have changed their processes. So NAB are a major bank, and they changed their practices from it used to take 21 days to go through a process of accessing hardship support, and it was costing them the amount of time it takes to process a 21-day application. And now customers actually can call up and get that processed in 10 minutes. Because what the bank's philosophy is now is we're going to choose to believe people. And by choosing to believe people, NAB is saving $70 million a year in collections. And they're a bank, and I don't know if anybody's glanced at the news lately, but there's a sort of a Royal Commission going on. And they've had 0 complaints in the last 5 months in relation to hardship debt. So 0 complaints around financial hardship, and they are a bank in the news every 47 minutes. So we're able to sort of talk to government about the fact that changing your processes, their collection processes are a little tough. And so we're saying by changing that and them changing that philosophy of choosing to believe people, then they can actually save money as well.
My second question was really inspirational stuff, and you can see how you've got corporate and government utilities coming together. When you look at employment in Tasmania, we go from, government's obviously a very big employer, government business,
Yep.
a smattering of corporate, and then a massive small business and micro business. And so everyone clearly has a role to play, particularly in where we're employing people who are experiencing these issues.
Yep.
I just wonder what the opportunities are and the extent to which you have small business engaged and what support, how small business engages in this type of initiative.
Look, at the moment, Thriving's probably working, as far as corporate goes, with more of the larger corporate organisations. But what we're also looking at is things around social procurement. So social procurement's a big topic at the moment for those of you who happen to be in the social or inclusion workspace. And it's about how do we actually create better connections for local communities and that includes local businesses. I was in a meeting yesterday with TAS Water and Aurora Energy and a couple of the community organisations down here about looking at a potential start-up of a Thriving Communities chapter in Hobart, in Tasmania. And what came out of that conversation was very similar. A lot of the energy providers down here, the small gas providers down here, are mum and papa businesses. So how can they play a part in this journey as well? So it's something that we're looking at down here in Tassie that we can maybe connect into to see how we can better connect the smaller businesses.
Great. Any more questions? One last question for Ciara.
Thank you, Ciara. I just want to comment that was very inspirational because in the water industry or when you're just a part of a system, you don't see how you can make a difference. And I just want to say it's given me food for thought to think, how can believing people make a difference? We always think data and technology for truth, but we have people saying the truth. So a lot of food for thought. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we might... one more question?
Oh, thanks so much for a fantastic presentation, Ciara. I echo the comment that it was incredibly inspirational. I was interested in, you've been hugely successful in achieving collaboration in your sector across diverse businesses. What would you say has been the main key to success in getting a whole industry and multiple business to come together to provide a shared service and something that provides behind a single goal that's about your customer?
Look, I think in Thriving Communities, everything we do is based on the foundation of international partnership brokering framework. And that framework's about making sure that every single person has an equal voice. So you could have a big bank and you could have a community organisation that's got 3 people, but the voice and equity in that is exactly the same. So we have a really structured process and we have rules of engagement. And we're very clear about those rules of engagement. So part of that is there is no competition. So, we've got the major energy companies and banks and telcos in this country working together, and they have to collaborate when it comes to hardship and vulnerability. And to assist us in doing that, we actually ran another roundtable so we had our first roundtable in 2016. And then we said to businesses, if this is something that we want to do together and to commit to together, we need to have a charter of behaviour. When you've got major corporations like this, it can be easy to slip off the wagon. So how do we create that? So we actually co-created together. So everything we do is in that. I know everyone uses co-create these days. It's like, it's the new colour of the century, but we actually fundamentally use that co-create philosophy. So we came together to decide what is it we wanted to do together and how do we want to behave. We cannot compete. We have to have the customer at the centre of everything we're designing. And so we created a whole range of principles, and a lot of those were also based on human rights, international human rights principles as well. And we all agreed to that together. Now, if I'm honest, we did wonder how the no competition rule would go. And it's a competitive market. Water's not a competitive market, so it's really easy for us to collaborate. And we often talk about the fact that, behind each other's backs, we're always trying to beat each other on the, comparative stuff to government. But publicly, we're always about collaboration. So with the major energy companies in this country, so we've got AGL, Origin and Energy Australia are all partners. And to show their commitment to this stand, we have a lot of conferences, a lot of vulnerability and financial hardship conferences that we all go to, and all of the businesses sponsor those conferences. And now, at every single one of those conferences, those three major energy companies who used to compete for top billing sponsor that together, and they have a Thriving Communities Partnership banner that says, "We won't compete for hardship. We won't compete when it comes to vulnerable customers." So they're actually committing to that. We've had, NAB, who's another one of our founding partners, actually go in and mentor another financial institution on their Assist program that's been so successful. We've got Telstra, who's its own country, essentially, and probably hasn't necessarily worked in the space of collaboration hugely in the past. They've been driving a number of our programs, and Optus has just signed up, and we're saying, well, we need Optus to come into this particular project, and they're like, bring them in. So what we're finding is the issues are actually so real. Our staff are hearing these things on the phone. Our people that work for us are experiencing them that personally themselves. And so I think it's one of those things where genuinely businesses have tried to do things. They've tried to do things to support the community, but it actually just hasn't worked. So it's almost that kind of catalyst and that perfect storm of it's just not fixing it. So the only opportunity we have to make a difference is to collaborate. And so that's, I guess, kind of where it's morphed into, and that they have to sign the charter and they have to hold to that charter.
Great, thank you. So, on behalf of the committee and the organising group, I'd like to thank you for your presentation this morning, and join with me in thanking Ciara.